Hello, Gaz Williams here for Sonic Lab, and today we are looking at the Roland Boutique D-05. Ta-da! Here it is. This is the latest in the Roland Boutique range, where mostly they're going back and sort of plundering their own history and sort of bringing little modern recreations of them. And it's now the time for the 30-year-old, it's its birthday, happy birthday little box, insides, for the Roland D-50. Now, the Roland D-50, when it came out in 1987, was a really groundbreaking synth for many reasons. And I mean, arguably, you could even say it's the first sort of virtual analog, because for an entirely digital synthesizer, there was a complete analog style synthesizer built in. Well, not just one, four layers of it. And that's kind of what gives the D-50 its uniqueness, because not only could you combine these four different analog styles, you could mix them in with PCM samples, which is pretty standard fare certainly for the last 20 odd years. But when the D-50 came out, that was very groundbreaking. Also, the fact that the D-50 also had built-in effects, which gave it a much more kind of complete and impressive sound. Now, the sound I opened with, I'm sure many of you will know, is Soundtrack, which is a legendary sort of D-50 sound. And that's a sound that really shows the D-50 off with the kind of complex interaction of the different layers. Now, that sound was written by the great Eric Persing, him of Omnisphere, Spectrasonics fame, and it's quite interesting because when you actually play around with the structure of the D-05, you can actually see a direct lineage between the D-50 and Omnisphere, because the idea of building sounds with two partials, and those partials can either be like an analog wave, well, a virtual analog wave, or a sample, very similar to kind of Omnisphere. So it's interesting to see how this is like the beginning, really, of that way of working. Now, as I mentioned, each patch can consist of four different layers, and that's split between an upper tone and a lower tone, and both of those tones consist of two partials. Now, the little joystick that we see on here, what that can do is that can pan between, like if we do it with this sound, there's the upper tone, that's the lower tone. And then from left to right, you would toggle either, you can adjust the partial balance of either the upper tone or lower tone. So it's quite often the joystick from a performance point of view is quite subtle, but it's still nevertheless quite a nice little touch that they put on there. And speaking of which, the D-50, one of the things that kind of was one of the most notable things about the D-50 was it was a very slick looking synthesizer, gone with the knobs of old, and in its place is this small little display and a bunch of buttons. Now, that might seem like an anathema to many for how to program a synth, but I was thinking about this, and actually the amount of knobs that you'd have to get all the parameters would make it enormous. So I can kind of understand why they went to this editing way. So at the back, we've got MIDI on DIN plugs, which is nice to see. We've also got three sockets. We've got a line out, a headphone out, and a mix in. So other units, or you could just through the audio. And also we've got a volume control and a USB, which provides both power and MIDI, and if you install the drivers, audio too. So yes, this can function as a very basic audio interface. So if you use that as an aggregate device on your computer, for instance, then you could, in a sense, have it as its own audio interface connected with your existing one, which that's how I've been using it at home, and that's pretty cool. Underneath, there is a little tiny speaker that's just kind of there. It's not particularly useful. But also a battery compartment for 4 AA batteries. On the front panel, as most of the Boutique series have got, there's a pitch and mod wheel. And if you haven't got a keyboard plugged in, you can use the pitch wheel as a way of entering notes to sort of, so you can preview your sounds. The rest of it, though, really is very accurately recreating pretty much all the features that were on the original D50, including along the bottom here a graphic which shows the pitch envelopes and the time variable filter envelope and the time variable amplitude envelope, plus how the EQ works. And actually that stuff's quite useful when you do delve into this little tiny little screen and kind of try and make your own patches. Now, speaking of patches, this is actually ram-packed full of patches. Not only does it come with the complete original presets now, and this is where I found number 37 soundtrack. If I go here, patch bank 1, patch number 1, then we're in Fantasia land, which is one of the very famous D50 patches. And therefore we've got 8 banks of 8 patches, and that really was what was in the original. But the D-05 has a few more to offer, because if we go into this preset here and use the increment and decrement buttons, we can step up through a whole bunch of others. And I think that it has all of the cards that were released by Roland during the D50's lifetime. So that's really cool. It means that there is actually tons and tons of presets to explore, as well as those original patches in bank number 2, and let's go there now. We've got patches which are brand new patches which were designed specifically for the D-05. And there's one here that I like, which is this fat warm pad. And it's kind of a really rich and juicy sound you get from the D50, and for a 30-year-old synthesizer, I mean, albeit brought back to life with this one, the sounds haven't as dated as badly as I thought they were going to be. In fact, I could imagine using plenty of them in a contemporary sort of setting. So within the boutique form factor, they've managed, as I mentioned, to have put all of the features and the buttons in. So they've actually recreated the entire workflow of the original D50, and now that is either a good thing or a bad thing depending on your patience. I mean, it's certainly a good thing in terms of they've made a complete recreation of their legendary synthesizer, and it deserves to be given that sort of, to be brought back, because it really is a beautiful sounding instrument. But the editing of it is a little bit of a kind of, is this something that we want to go particularly back to? So I'll give you a little sort of demonstration of what editing on the D-05 entails. So with this modern patch, we'll have a little look at how it's constructed, and then that will sort of show us how we use the editing functions on this. So what we do is we press edit, and that takes us into our edit menu, and it's like the top level of the edit menu, and we can pan across here between 2 pages. So the tuning, patch edit, lower tone, upper tone. So I'll hit lower tone, and now I'm in this edit mode. These buttons have lit up at the bottom here, and these buttons show us, can let us navigate around the editing facility. So, for instance, this sound here, it consists of 4 different elements, 2 in the lower, 2 in the upper, and I can mute all those parts. So now I'm just listening to partial 1, okay, partial 2, upper partial 1, and so there we go. So that sound is made up of those 4, and now so the fact I can mute them and turn them on and off is quite cool, because it means I can listen to what I'm doing. But also these buttons over here, they let us select whether we're editing the upper the upper tones or the lower tones. So if I was to go, for instance, into part 1, into the pitch, for instance, I could choose the coarse tuning or fine tuning, various things. And this brings the joystick in as a little editing tool. So let's have a look at this then. So we're listening, 1 partial. Let's find the filter, for instance. So we'll just pan across here, and we find the filter. Now, one annoying thing is I go to change the parameters and they don't change. You have to hit the button underneath to make it flash, to make it then available to edit. So it's just an extra button press that's a bit frustrating. So here we can hear the filter. But if I toggle this switch from value to local, then what it means is that both parameters which are on screen during any point in the editing process, you can adjust the left one with the left and right, and the right one with the up and down. So in the case of here, we've got frequency left to right, and then up and down, we've got resonance as well. So you can do a little bit of that kind of sort of synthesizer-y stuff, but that's buried right in that edit menu. You can't just save a patch and have that little joystick set up to do that sort of thing. You'd sort of need to be able, you know, if you wanted to do that sort of filtery sweep, you need to be able to just dive in, edit, get paged to it. And that's one of the kind of frustrations of, well, not really D-05, that is how the D50 works, so it's only replicating that, but it's something to be aware of, that the D-05 isn't necessarily the sort of synthesizer you'd get to if you want to modify lots of the sounds in real time. That is, unless you are using some MIDI controller, and then there's actually loads you can do, because the D-05 will respond, pretty much everything will respond to MIDI. And when the original D50 came out, there was a programmer, was at the PG-1000, which was loads of controls, which enabled you to modify the sounds in real time. Now, it would be nice maybe if Roland reissued that, but that isn't available yet. But what is available is an editor available for the iPad. Patchbase is the name of the software. The software itself is free, but there's an in-app purchase, which I think is about UK £20, which allows you to unlock the functionality of this. And when you look at all the parameters that you've got available, you can kind of understand why the D-05 is the way it is in terms of the editing. To have a physical knob for everything on there would be impossible. It's a bit of a rabbit hole thing, and it is a powerful synthesizer. So, as I mentioned, each partial can be a PCM sample, or can be like a kind of a generated waveform. Now, the samples are mostly used as attack samples because when the D50 came out, RAM was so expensive. So these samples are really, really short. So they found that just by having just the attack portion of a PCM sample, you could combine that with the waveform, and then the combination of the two could kind of get the best of both worlds. And there's many patches that kind of demonstrate that quite well. So if we jump out now, and I'm going to jump back to the original patches that came with it. And if we find, like here's the strings, for instance. Now, they might not be the most realistic strings by today's standard, but the fact that you can hear the pitsy element and the sustain portion being made up with the wave. Yeah, so these sounds, some of them might be dated, but I think there's still a lot that could be done with them. And I think there's going to be a load of people who are going to be experiencing these sounds for the first time. And I'm really interested to wonder what they're going to do with them and how they're going to use them. There is certainly like a lot of presence, and some of them are really big sounding. And as I mentioned, you know, these sounds pretty lush. Now, in the original D50, it was perhaps because the processor was a little bit underpowered for the age. There was a little bit of lag when you were doing digital editing. That doesn't appear to be the problem now with the D-05. It does seem to be pretty responsive. So I'm imagining that the editing isn't going to be quite as painful as it used to be. However, to edit, I mean, these envelopes with, you know, AD, well, all these, how many parts are there? There's AD, SR, complex edits, and going through with it, just adding the increment and decrement or whatever. You're going to try your patience. However, it does allow you the complete editing experience though. So if you're brave enough, then the depth is certainly here. A few more things about the structure though. From the top level here, the D-05 is like a duo timbral really. It can be, you can access the upper tone and the lower tone on separate MIDI channels. It's 16 voice polyphony. Well, if you were using just one of the, if in here for instance, if we were to go into whole, then within just an upper tone, I'd have the full 16 voice polyphony. But when you're combining an upper tone and a lower tone, then it'll be like 8 voice polyphony, 8 voices per layer. But here, though, it allows us to choose a whole bunch of voicings, like whether there's a split point, so you can have different sounds, the upper tone and the lower tone on separate sounds, or you can have it like monophonic on the right hand side, polyphonic on the left hand side. There's a whole bunch of options that were in the original as well, so that's nice to see. There is this funny feature that I don't know if it was ever in any other synth called chase. And chase is like a sort of like a delay. I don't know, let me find a good sound for the chase sound. Like. So it's like a kind of artificial delay where the sound of the upper tone and the lower tone sort of follow each other. So that brings me to another point with this. The effects, which are kind of cool. I've got mixed feelings about them. The reverb is definitely very dated sounding, but with that is a certain charm and a certain sound. But the effects are very buried, you know, very deeply buried within. So I'd have to hit edit, I'd have to come across and go into patch edit, pan across to output, come across, here I am, and I've got reverb balance now, and now I could choose. And within there's I think 32 different algorithms. Turn the chase off. So not the most detailed editing of the effects, but good that it's still there. On top of there being the chorus, this reverb, which also has got some delay functionality, there is a chorus as well that can be applied to the upper tone and the lower tone separately. So approaching the D-05 as the boutique version of the D50, that does actually bring a few extra functions that wasn't on the original, and then we can find that in the form of a sequencer. Now it's got a step sequencer in it, like I think all of the boutiques have, and in this case it's a polyphonic sequencer. So when I'm within this sequencer, I can, I'll just stop that for a moment. Pattern select, there's like 64 different patches, so you can store the patch and the sequence as one, so that's quite nice. But so far I found it all a little bit fiddly. It's not my favourite feature, but it is good that it's on there. Also, slightly hidden, shift and sequencer opens up an arpeggiator. Let's turn it on. With a few different varieties. And I can latch it as well. So the big question is, does the D50 warrant this boutique format? And I think it does. I think it's a very important synthesizer in Roland's history, and the boutique range is all about that. It's about capturing and giving, well, you know, new generation of people really the experience of these classic synthesizers. However, the D50 being a digital synth and having this quite complex editing through this little screen, that's not necessarily something that we wanted to go back to. So, but it has all of the MIDI functionality inside it, so if you want to use external editors, you can. So these sounds, and they do sound really good, to be fair, it does still sound like a beautiful synth. You know, you can choose a whole myriad of ways to control it. So that's pretty cool. And it still works with the PG-1000. If you can find one of them, plug it in, all of the parameters will find the right parameter. It all maps perfectly. So that's really cool. I'm really pleased that Roland have maintained that. And of course, original D50 patches can be imported into the D-05. So it's fully compatible with the full legacy of the D50. So the D-05 is available now. It's priced around 349 UK pounds. You might be able to find it a bit cheaper if you shop around. And slightly on the expensive side of things, I think, for what it is. So maybe in time it'll come down a little bit. But I mean, there certainly is a load of patches in there. There's a load of good sounds in there. Small form factor. It's really well made. The audio functionality over USB and the MIDI functionality over USB. MIDI DIN plugs. Nice metal construction. Yeah, pretty good. I like it. I'm Gaz Williams. Thanks very much for watching. This is Sonicstate. See you soon.